Have you ever been high, really high, but still felt something missing? Like the moment was beautiful, even profound, yet underneath it all, there was a silence, an ache, as if something sacred had brushed past you but didn't stay. Maybe it wasn't the plant that failed you. Maybe it was the way you were taught to use it. There's an ancient memory, soft but insistent, that lives in the body, not in the mind. It says, you've been here before. You've known this clarity, this peace. You just didn't know how to hold it. Cannabis was never meant to numb you. It was meant to remind you. This isn't just about getting high. It's about remembering the forgotten ritual, the one that used to make the plant a teacher, not just a tool. So what if you've never used it the right way? And what if now you're ready to begin? You probably didn't mean for it to become a habit. Maybe it started as curiosity, a night alone, a friend passing something in silence, a moment when the world finally softened and your thoughts, usually so loud, stepped back. There, in that pause, something opened, a flicker of stillness, a glimpse of something ancient. You felt it, didn't you? That quiet pull, like your body remembering a language older than words. And yet, the more you chased that moment, the further it seemed to drift. Each high brought release, but not depth. And deep down, you knew there's more than this. Long before dispensaries, long before brands and bongs and Instagram aesthetics, cannabis was sacred. It was never about getting high. It was about getting clear. In temples buried by time, in smoke-filled caves and silent forests, people lit this plant not to numb but to connect. They called it medicine, not because it cured illness, but because it opened the soul. Ancient Egyptians spoke of Thoth, the god of wisdom, who gifted rituals that could bend consciousness. In those rites, cannabis wasn't an escape. It was an offering. In Hindu texts, the plant was said to calm the mind for meditation. And across oceans, in Rastafarian tradition, it was known as the holy herb, a way to reason, not run. Somehow, along the way, we lost that thread. Today, 96% use cannabis without intention. Not because they're wrong, but because no one ever taught them otherwise. It's become background noise, a coping tool, a nightly ritual without the ritual. But ancient teachings whisper still. The plant only mirrors what you bring to it. You see, it's not about the herb, it's about your presence. You could light up in silence or in chaos. You could breathe it in with gratitude or out of boredom. And the experience would shape itself around that energy. Because like all sacred tools, this plant responds not to your words, but to your awareness. The difference between medicine and poison is how you hold it. This isn't a lecture. It's a remembering, a soft invitation to ask, what if I've never really met the plant for what it is? If you've ever felt something deeper, an expanded sense of self, a moment of awe, a strange clarity, then you've already touched its sacred edge. That wasn't just chemicals, that was a doorway. And you can return, not by doing more, but by doing it differently. By slowing down, lighting a candle, breathing in, not to rise above life, but to meet it fully. By letting the plant become a mirror, not a mask. Because when you meet it like that, the plant remembers too. Long before we called it weed, it had many names. In the temples of Egypt, it was smoke from the sacred blue lotus. In the Vedas of India, it was bhang offered to Shiva, the god of transformation. In the hills of ancient China, hemp was burned in honor of the hemp maiden, Magu, a spirit of longevity and inner healing. And across the seas, among the Rastafari, it was not a drug but a prayer ganja, the holy herb used in reasoning sessions under the open sky. Cannabis was never meant to be casual. It was woven into ceremony, guided by rhythm and reverence. Shamans didn't light it while scrolling a screen. They lit it under moonlight, in silence, with chants passed down through generations. Every ritual began not with fire, but with intentions spoken softly into the smoke, as if the plant could hear. And perhaps it could. Among the most mysterious stories is that of Thoth, the Egyptian deity of divine wisdom, keeper of sacred geometry, scribe of the soul's journey. In some texts, it's said that Thoth taught a ritual involving sacred herbs and sound frequencies used not to intoxicate, but to initiate, a ceremony performed once and remembered forever. The ritual involved breath, stillness, the geometry of candles arranged in sacred patterns. The smoke wasn't inhaled for sensation, it was received, like a blessing. Practitioners reported visions of light spirals, encounters with ancestors, messages too pure for language. These weren't highs, they were homecomings. The moon, too, played a role. Certain rituals aligned with its waxing and waning cycles. Why? Because altered states open more easily when the body, the plant, and the sky move in harmony. That's when doorway moments appear, when the veil thins and the everyday becomes sacred. These ceremonies weren't about escaping reality. They were about expanding it, about walking through a threshold with the plant as guide, not to see something new, but to remember what's always been. And yet, much of this has been forgotten. Today, we consume without context. We inhale without intention. And still, now and then, something ancient stirs inside us. A vision in meditation, a dream that lingers, a whisper that says, "You've done this before." Maybe you have. Maybe the reason you're drawn to this plant isn't random. Maybe your soul remembers the rituals your mind has forgot. And maybe now, it's time not to learn something new, but to return to a way of using the sacred that's not about getting high, but coming home. Two people can light the same herb, sit in the same silence, inhale the same smoke, and yet their journeys will not be the same. One uses it to forget, to mute the ache of a long day, to drift further from a self they no longer recognize. The other uses it to remember, to soften the edges of ego, to step back into the quiet truth of who they've always been. The difference? It's not the strain, not the dosage, not the playlist in the background, it's the intention. Intention is subtle. It doesn't shout, but it shapes everything. When you approach cannabis without it, it becomes a habit, a loop, something you reach for automatically without presence. But when you bring intention, the same act becomes sacred. A small ceremony, a mirror. In ancient traditions, the ritual didn't begin with the first inhale, it began with the first question. Why am I here? That single moment of asking shifted the entire energy. Suddenly, the plant wasn't something to consume, it was something to meet. This is the secret doorway most miss. Intention isn't about perfection, it's about awareness. A breath before lighting up, a whisper of gratitude, a silent promise to yourself, I'm not escaping, I'm arriving. And it doesn't need to be elaborate. It could be as simple as lighting a candle, sitting in stillness, placing a hand on your heart and saying, let this guide me inward. That's it. That's the shift. That's what turns smoke into spirit. Because the truth is, every spiritual tool, every ritual, every herb, every practice draws its power from how you hold it, from how you show up to it. When intention leads, the plant becomes more than a substance. It becomes a space. A place you return to not for distraction, but for direction. So the next time you reach for it, pause, ask what you're seeking. Listen for the answer beneath the noise. That's your first ritual, right there. Not in the flame, not in the inhale, but in the choosing. The choosing to meet the moment with presence, with reverence. Because when you do, everything changes even if nothing else does. Deep inside your brain, tucked between hemispheres, rests something small, no larger than a grain of rice, pinecone-shaped, ancient, mysterious. It's called the pineal gland. Science tells us it regulates melatonin, controls sleep cycles, helps maintain circadian rhythm. But long before modern studies gave it a function, mystics gave it meaning. They called it the third eye, not for what it sees outside, but for what it reveals within. This inner eye isn't about visions or fantasies. It's about clarity, perception without filter, the ability to witness reality not as it appears, but as it truly is. And here's the thing, it's not broken, just dormant, as if the world slowly taught you to forget it. Distraction, noise, stress, they blur its vision, but it's still there. Waiting and cannabis. It might be a key, but only if you're already at the door. THC, the active compound, interacts with brain regions tied to memory, creativity, and perception. It lowers the veil of everyday awareness, and in some, heightens that quiet sense of being more. Researchers at UCLA found that in intentional use, cannabis can temporarily suppress the default mode network, the same brain region that dims during deep meditation or mystical experience. But this isn't about getting higher. It's about getting quieter, because your third eye doesn't open through force. It opens through surrender. That's why ancient texts often linked the pineal gland to spiritual awakening. It was the meeting point between body and spirit, a biological gateway to divine insight. And yes, when combined with meditation, breathwork, and stillness, cannabis can become the spark that wakes the flame. But not if you're rushing, not if you're chasing the feeling. It only responds when you're ready to listen. This is the real high, not a peak, but a remembering, a homecoming to the light inside the dark, that flicker behind your closed eyes, the warmth that says, this is you beyond thought, beyond fear, beyond time. So if you've ever felt something stir while you were still an image, a knowing, a sudden sense of presence you weren't imagining it, that was your third eye blinking. And it's calling you to see again. Somewhere along the way, your mind started walking in circles. Same thoughts, same emotions, same stories on loop. It's not your fault, it's how the brain protects what it knows. But what if healing begins not with adding something new, but with remembering something ancient? Enter the default mode network, a complex web in your brain responsible for self-talk, time awareness, and the running narration of your identity. It's the voice always commenting, always comparing, always rehearsing the past or fearing the future. And while it helps you navigate daily life, it can also trap you inside patterns, projections, personas that no longer serve. But something curious happens when cannabis is used consciously. Modern neuroscience shows that THC, when paired with intention, temporarily silences the default mode network. The chatter softens, the walls bend, and in that quiet, a doorway opens, not to escape but to expand. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, isn't just a buzzword, it's a sacred design. And states of altered consciousness, like those induced by mindful cannabis use, may accelerate this rewiring. Combined with practices like breathwork, meditation, or music tuned to specific frequencies, the brain begins to form new connections. Pathways once dormant begin to glow again. And here's the truth: cannabis doesn't give you visions. It simply removes the fog. It doesn't implant meaning, it reveals it. Buried under conditioning, beneath decades of noise, your spiritual wiring is still intact. And when the old loops go quiet, when the nervous system is safe, something remarkable happens. You remember. You remember the dream you had as a child, where light moved like language. You remember how it felt to feel connected to everything. You remember that there was never anything wrong with you, just layers that needed peeling. That's what makes this a spiritual tool, not a shortcut. It doesn't carry you, it walks beside you. And with each step, the brain rewires not around who you've been, but who you're becoming. You start choosing presence over projection, response over reaction, trust over trauma. You don't become someone new. You return to someone ancient. You light up, settle in, and breathe deep. At first, there's stillness, a soft expansion. But then, an hour later, you're scrolling, snacking, searching for something, but you don't know what. You're high, but not lifted. Relaxed, but strangely heavy. Awake, but somehow dim. That's the hidden cost of unconscious use. Ancient cultures viewed cannabis as a sacred bridge. But without intention, that bridge leads nowhere, or worse, loops back into confusion. You think you're elevating, but beneath the surface, your energy is leaking. Science offers a clue. THC temporarily floods your system with dopamine, the feel-good chemical of novelty, motivation, reward. But pair it with junk food, noise, endless scrolling, and your receptors get confused. They begin chasing stimulation instead of presence. That's when the leak begins. Not dramatic, not explosive, just subtle, a slow siphoning of focus, of clarity, of vitality. And it doesn't end when the high fades. Days later, you may feel dull, flat, uninspired because energy has gone out but not come back in. The ritual wasn't held. The circuit wasn't closed. This is why some people say, "I feel more tired now when I use it." Or, "I used to get insights, now I just snack and zone out." It's not the plant, it's the pattern. But here's the grace: patterns can shift. And the moment you notice the leak, you begin to seal it. Try this next time you smoke. Don't reach for your phone. Don't open another tab, just sit. Let the quiet stretch. Let the medicine settle. Listen for what it's actually revealing. Is it boredom or buried feeling? Is it hunger or habit? Every urge is a doorway to deeper awareness. And the more you choose presence, the less energy escapes unnoticed. What once drained you begins to nourish you. Because when used with care, cannabis doesn't scatter your power, it concentrates it. And you realize, maybe it was never meant to get you high in the way you thought. Maybe it was meant to bring you deep, into yourself, into stillness, into the kind of clarity that doesn't fade when the buzz wears off. That's not just being stoned, that's being home. You stop smoking. A few days pass. Then suddenly your dreams return. Not faint, fleeting ones, but vivid, pulsing visions. Whole worlds unfold behind your eyes. Colors you can't name. People you've never met, speaking truths you almost forgot. It's startling and familiar. This isn't coincidence. It's your brain remembering. When you use cannabis regularly, THC suppresses REM sleep, the dream-rich stage where your subconscious stretches, processes, reveals. It's like dimming the theater lights inside your mind. But when you stop, something beautiful happens, a rebound. Scientists call it REM rebound. Your brain, finally free from suppression, floods you with dreams. It's making up for lost time. But deeper than science, there's something soulful here, because dreams aren't just neural activity. They're messengers. In many traditions, dreams are how the soul whispers, how buried memories surface, how healing begins when words no longer reach. That's why, when you stop using, the dreams don't just return, they roar. They bring clarity, emotion, even visions. You may dream of ancestors, lost parts of yourself, landscapes that feel more real than waking life. And yes, it can feel overwhelming, especially if you've used cannabis to silence anxiety or escape emotion. But these dreams aren't punishment. They're offerings, invitations to witness the parts of you that stayed silent while the smoke rose. So what do? You listen, you write, you let them speak. Keep a journal by your bed. Light a candle before sleep. Set an intention not to control the dream, but to welcome it. And if a symbol keeps returning or a figure appears again and again, don't analyze too quickly. Just sit with it. Let it unfold like a story written in your own energy. This is the deeper magic of the quit. Not just clarity in the day, but revelation in the night. Because sometimes, the most sacred messages don't come in visions when you're awake, but in dreams when you finally rest. And in those moments, you may realize you never stopped dreaming. You just stopped remembering. Now your soul is speaking again. Close your eyes after a mindful inhale, and sometimes there it is. A spiral of light, a pulsing grid, a circle that moves but never breaks. You weren't imagining it, you were witnessing it. Something older than thought, more precise than words. Sacred geometry. In altered states, especially those amplified by conscious cannabis use, the mind often opens to symbolic languages. Not letters or numbers, but patterns. Light that bends into form. Movement that repeats like music frozen mid-vibration. These shapes aren't just pretty visuals, they are codes. Cultures across time have described them. The flower of life carved into temples, the eye of Horus whispering in Egyptian glyphs, the Sri Yantra radiating from tantric art. All echoes of the same language, a geometry that the soul somehow knows. And cannabis, when used with reverence, seems to thin the veil between you and this intelligence. Users often report seeing rotating mandalas, tunnels of light, and infinite lattices of sound and structure. But what's most fascinating isn't just the beauty, it's the recognition. A feeling like you've seen these shapes before, even though you've never learned them. Why? Because these aren't decorations. They're mirrors. The pineal gland, the so-called third eye, doesn't just regulate sleep. It may be a translator of symbolic perception. A receiver tuned not to logic, but to resonance. And in the stillness that cannabis can create, you begin to perceive not with your mind, but through it. That's why certain symbols feel alive. Why geometric visions feel more true than dreams. It's not hallucination, it's language, one without ego, one without argument, just pure form, pure rhythm, pure light. So the next time you feel a spiral in your chest, or see a glowing eye in meditation, or sense that the room is breathing in shapes, don't pull away. Let it in. Trace the pattern. Let the symbol unfold itself, not into meaning, but into memory. Because long before you could speak, you understood this. Long before religion or science, you're being responded to pattern, to proportion, to sacred shape. And maybe, just maybe, these visions aren't effects of the plant at all. Maybe they're reminders, and cannabis, just the key that unlocks the part of you that still remembers how to see in light. There's a moment, subtle and quiet, where something sacred begins to shift. You're still lighting the herb, still calling it a ceremony, still playing the music and sitting in silence. But deep down, something feels off. You're not expanding, you're escaping. This is the trap few talk about. The space where cannabis, once a guide, becomes a mask. where opening the heart becomes numbing the pain, where connecting with spirit becomes avoiding yourself. It's not always obvious. You might still feel relaxed, still have insights, but if you look closely, the patterns speak louder than the peace. Are you needing it to sleep, to feel, to be okay with being alone? Science begins to reflect what mystics have long known: overuse of THC affects dopamine regulation. The highs flatten, the joy fades, motivation slips quietly away, and even dreams once vivid with guidance begin to vanish into fog. It's not that cannabis is wrong. It's that your relationship with it has shifted. And like any relationship, unconscious use breeds distance, not intimacy. Sometimes the body knows before the mind does. You feel sluggish. Not physically, but energetically, like you're carrying a subtle weight. You meditate, but you're disconnected. You journal, but the words feel dry. You chase the state instead of sinking into truth. This is the spiritual bypass when the smoke covers what still aches inside. But here's the invitation, not guilt, not judgment, just awareness. You don't need to quit to reconnect, but you do need to pause, to ask why, to ask if this plant is still a mirror or has it become a mask. There is power in putting it down, not forever, but for long enough to feel what's underneath. The grief, the fear, the longing. These, too, are part of your awakening. And when you return, if you return, it won't be as a seeker looking for a feeling. It will be as a soul remembering the experience isn't in the plant. It's in you. This is not a script. It's not a rule book or a rigid set of steps. This is a doorway, quiet, simple, and yours. In a world that made everything fast and forgettable, ritual is what makes something matter. It marks the moment. It says, you are here now. And when you bring that presence to cannabis, the experience shifts. It deepens, it speaks. You don't need incense, chants, or ancient mantras. You only need a little space, a few minutes, and the willingness to treat this plant as a teacher, not a tool. So here is a gentle, 5-step guide for turning your next session into something sacred. Step 1, set the space. Turn off the noise. Dim the lights. Choose a place where your body feels safe and your energy feels undisturbed. This is your sanctuary, even if it's just a corner of a room. Step 2, breathe with intention. Before anything else, pause. Sit upright. Inhale slowly. Hold. Exhale even slower. Do this a few times, not to relax, but to arrive. Let your breath become the first bridge into presence. Step 3, speak your intention. Say it out loud or whisper it inside. I come with reverence. I open to clarity. I am ready to release. Whatever rises, let it be simple and sincere. It doesn't need to be poetic. It just needs to be true. Step 4, light with awareness. As you bring fire to the herb, visualize the spark not as destruction, but as ignition, like lighting a candle for yourself. A beacon, a signal to your deeper self that the ritual has begun. Each inhale is not to get high, but to rise. Step 5, close with gratitude. When the session feels complete, don't rush to re-enter the world. Sit, reflect. Offer thanks to the plant, to your breath, to your body for being here. Gratitude is what seals the sacred. This 5-step flow isn't meant to be followed perfectly. It's meant to be felt. With time, it becomes your own. Maybe you add music. Maybe you light a candle. Maybe you speak a name, a prayer, a dream. What matters is that you remember. Ceremony doesn't come from the outside. It comes from you choosing to treat anything with honor. Even a single breath, even this moment, even now. There's a secret most people miss. The high was never about the smoke. Yes, the plant helped. Yes, it opened something. But what it opened was already inside you. The door was always there. The ritual just gave you the key. And once it's open, truly open, you don't need the key every time. You begin to realize there are ways to stay high, not in the sense of intoxication, but in elevation, in expansion, in connection. That feeling of being lifted, softened, realigned, it doesn't disappear when the smoke fades. It deepens when you learn how to carry it with you. It starts with the breath. Your breath is the original plant medicine. Long before fire, before herb, before incense, there was the inhale. There was the exhale, and between them, the stillness where everything waits. Conscious breathing slows the brain's default noise. It gently shifts you from urgency to presence. One breath is a doorway. A few breaths become a return home. Then there is sound. Not just music, but resonance, tones, frequencies. A single drone or chant can hold your nervous system in a cradle of calm. Sound baths, binaural beats, or even silence when chosen with intention can match the frequencies once evoked by cannabis and help you remember how to listen to your own rhythm. And then stillness. Stillness doesn't mean stopping. It means listening deeper, meditating not to silence the mind, but to hear the heart beneath it. This is where the high evolves into clarity. When you meditate after ceremony, or even without one, you begin to notice. The peace was never in the leaf. It was in the space the leaf helped you clear. That's what integration really is. Taking what you found in the sacred and planting it in the ordinary, making dinner, washing your hands, watching the sky. Staying high becomes a practice of staying awake. You're not dependent, you're not separate, you're simply remembering how to be connected always. And when you do pick up the plant again, it meets you not as a crutch, but as a companion, a mirror, a soft echo of something you already carry. The ritual was never about what you lit. It was about what you lit up inside. Maybe the lesson was never about rising. Maybe it was about remembering how deep you already are. Cannabis is not a ladder. It's a mirror. It doesn't lift you somewhere else, it reflects what's already inside, waiting. The true ritual isn't in the smoke, or the song, or even the sacred symbols. It's in your choice, your presence, your willingness to pause and meet yourself. Every time you reach for the plant, you ask a question. Is this a habit? Or is this a doorway? The difference is subtle, but everything shifts when you choose to see it. So if tonight were the last time you ever touched cannabis, would you want it to be another unconscious moment? Or a ceremony that leaves you full, whole, and lit from within? You are the altar. You are the teacher. You've always had the depth you're searching for. Now what will you do with it?